Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're going to take a look at a case that really gripped France in the 90s. The story of Remy Roy, the so-called Minitel murderer.
Yeah, you know what's really fascinating about this case? It's Minitel. Just imagine like a pre-internet world, but with this network nationwide giving folks access to all these online services, even dating.
It's kind of wild, right? Like stepping back in time.
hmm
Minitel Rose, that was their dating platform, becomes a big part of Roy's story. And here's where things get really interesting. The contrast between his seemingly normal life and all this darkness underneath. We're talking happy childhood, sailing enthusiast, even worked with a collaborator of the famous environmentalist Nicolas Hulot. Had a wife, kids. You'd never suspect a thing.
Yeah, it's that dissonance that makes it so creepy. This facade of like a regular guy makes the crimes that much more chilling. It makes you wonder, was it all an act or did something just snap?
Okay, so let's break it down. We know Roy lived what looked like a totally peaceful life in Villejuif with his wife and two children. His wife even described him as a teddy bear, like
Right.
generous, kind, the kind of guy who just thrived on being loved. He even helped out at his wife's bookshop.
But things start to shift around 88. Seems like his purpose was a bit shaky. His wife hires a friend, so Roy doesn't have a clear role at the bookshop anymore. And then his attempt to launch a video production company. Total flop. This is where we see him spiraling, right? Depression, withdrawing from everyone, getting fixated on Minitel.
And it's through Minitel Rose, this early version of online dating, that everything goes sideways. It became his hunting ground. He was using it to connect with men, especially those with masochistic tendencies, arranging these meetings that would turn deadly.
You know what adds to the whole thing? This was all before the internet as we know it. Minitel was like this closed network, almost like a hidden world where these interactions were happening. Adds this layer of isolation and anonymity to the case.
All right, let's talk about his victims. 4 known victims all met Roy through Minitel Rose. First, there's Paul Bernard, an insurance agent found strangled in the woods near the Seine.
And get this, Bernard's online persona was very telling. His usernames hinted at his masochistic interests, which Roy totally exploited. He set up the meeting, pretended they had shared interests, then boom, things turned violent.
Then there's Gilbert Duquesnoy, pretty famous astrologer, went by Major Nathaniel, murdered in his own home. The crime scene was a weird mix, violence, but also staged elements.
Yeah, it's like a pattern starts to emerge. Roy targeting men with these specific desires, using those vulnerabilities to lure them in, and the ritualistic stuff. Suggests premeditation, control, super creepy.
The third victim, Hugues Moreau, businessman, found dead in his shop. Signs of a brutal attack.
Moreau's case adds another layer. His wife found him surrounded by S&M gear. Fed the public's fascination with the case, for sure.
And then Bruno Giraudon, the civil servant. He actually survived Roy's attack, but seriously injured. His testimony was huge for understanding Roy's methods.
Giraudon surviving. Total luck for the investigation. Allowed them to hear firsthand about Roy's manipulative tactics, how the violence escalated. It was like a crack in Roy's facade.
And here's where things get really crazy.
Roy messed up big time. After attacking Giraudon, he steals a check from him, uses it to buy video equipment, even puts his own picture on Giraudon's driver's license.
Talk about a rookie mistake.
Right. It's like he's slipping up. The shop clerk made a copy of that doctored ID, and that led the cops straight to Roy.
November 1991, Roy's arrested at his home. The perfect life shattered. Police find all this evidence, the checkbook, the ID.
And his reaction to the accusations? Wild. Denies everything, claims he's straight, hates homosexuals, tries to say he was the victim, forced to defend himself.
Classic deflection. But the evidence tells a different story.
Totally. Trying to blame the victims,
Yep.
but the forensics, the patterns, the testimonies, it all points to him.
Okay, so we have this complex picture. Seemingly loving husband and father, but with this dark side. What set him on this path? This is where the psychiatrist comes in.
Right. The psychiatrist who evaluated Roy suggests he might have repressed sadomasochistic tendencies, maybe from his childhood. They said these urges might have resurfaced during his depression, found a way out through Minitel, and ultimately led to violence.
Yeah, it's a chilling thought, isn't it? Like, he was trying to destroy these urges,
Yeah.
the ones he couldn't accept as part of himself.
So you're saying he was lashing out at what he was attracted to, couldn't reconcile those two sides.
It's a compelling theory, for sure. Adds another layer to this already messed up case. It becomes about more than murder, It's about internalized homophobia, that shame, that denial.
And all of this is happening as this new technology, Minitel, emerges. A tool that made his crimes possible, but also, in a way, led to his capture.
Right, exactly. Minitel gave him that anonymity, a place to explore these desires, but it also created a digital trail, a record that helped investigators figure out his movements, identify him.
It's a reminder that even when we think we're anonymous online, our actions have consequences. For sure. And it shows how technology can be, a double-edged sword, empowering but dangerous too.
So we've got the psychological factors, societal anxieties, and this new technology,
Yeah.
all coming together in this one case. What kind of impact did the Minitel murderer have on France at the time?
Oh, it definitely sparked a lot of fear, a lot of fascination. The media coverage was huge, sometimes sensationalized for sure. It fueled those anxieties about online interactions, especially dating.
And remember, this was still early days for the internet. People were just starting to understand the possibilities and the dangers of online communication.
Exactly. The case highlighted that anonymity, how it could be used to create fake identities, to manipulate people.
Almost like a precursor to catfishing, right? People creating these elaborate online personas to lure others in.
Yeah, that's a great comparison. And even though Minitel was mostly a French thing, the themes resonated globally. It raised those questions about online safety, about the dark side of human nature finding a space in the digital world.
It challenged the idea that online interactions weren't as real, less consequential.
Definitely. The Minitel murderer blew that illusion apart, showed that the consequences online could be just as devastating as in real life.
So it was a wake-up call, a warning about anonymity online, about being careful.
No doubt. And it opened up those important conversations about online safety, the need for education, and the ethics of this rapidly evolving digital landscape.
A legacy that continues today. With dating apps, social media, all these virtual spaces, the Minitel murderer feels more relevant than ever.
Absolutely. It reminds us that technology, even though it's transformative, is just a tool, and it can be used for good or bad. It's up to us, individuals, and society to shape its impact and use it responsibly.
That's a powerful thought, something to think about as we dig into the impact the Minitel murderer had on France. And we'll do that right after this. Okay, so we're back. And, before we wrap up this deep dive into the Minitel murderer, I think it's important to take a minute and remember the victims in all of this.
Oh, absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the, sensational aspects of a case like this, but these were real people whose lives were cut short, tragically.
Yeah, exactly. Paul Bernard, Gilbert de Conoy, Hugues Moreau, and of course Bruno Giraudon, who survived. They each had their own stories, families, loved ones left behind to deal with this loss.
And think about the added burden on their families, especially with the stigma around homosexuality back then. Many had to grieve in private, couldn't openly mourn or celebrate the lives of their loved ones.
Oh, and that's just heartbreaking. It really says a lot about the times, how fear and prejudice just make everything worse.
It does. It really highlights the need for empathy, remembering the human cost of these crimes, going beyond the headlines and the sensationalism.
So as we kind of come to a close here, what are some of the key takeaways from the Minitel murderer? What can we as listeners learn from this, even today?
I think one of the biggest takeaways is online safety, no matter what platform or technology you're using. That anonymity the internet offers can be both good and bad, right? Got to be mindful of what we share, the connections we make, the potential risks.
That's a good point. Remembering that people online might not be who they seem, and trusting your instincts if something feels off.
Another big lesson is open communication and education, especially around things like sexuality. The stigma and shame around being gay in the 90s definitely played a part in this tragedy.
It's so important to create a society where people feel safe being themselves,
Yeah.
to prevent something like this from happening again, fostering empathy, understanding, and challenging prejudice wherever we see it.
And lastly, I think the Minitel murderer is a powerful reminder that technology is a tool capable of great things, but also terrible things. It's up to us, individuals and society as a whole, to shape how it's used responsibly and ethically to create a digital world that's safe, inclusive, and empowers everyone.
Couldn't have said it better myself. As technology keeps evolving, we need to understand its impact, both the good and the bad. The Minitel murderer, even though it's this dark chapter in history, teaches us valuable lessons we can use as we navigate this digital age.
It pushes us to be mindful, empathetic, and proactive in building a future online where these kinds of tragedies don't happen again.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thanks for joining us as we explored the Minitel murderer case. We hope you found it insightful, something to think about. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.